Yesterday afternoon, Manuel Ugarte produced without doubt his best performance so far in a Manchester United shirt. He completed 92% of his passes, he won 10 out of 16 ground duels and completed 8 tackles in total, and things should only get better for him from here. He's settling into the club more and more each week, but also he has his former boss, Ruben about to take charge of the club, and Amorim is of course the manager that got the best out of Ugarte during his time at Sporting. So today we're going to look at how he was used at Sporting and how it can be recreated at Manchester United. But before we do that, quickly subscribe to the channel please. I really want to hit 40,000 by the end of the year, and then we'll get into the video. So we're going to start off with the way that Ugarte was used on the ball during his time with Sporting Lisbon. And the reason I want to focus on this area first is because I think this is where United fans are a little bit concerned. I think we know that Ugarte is a pretty decent ball winner, but on the ball, is he technically secure enough? Is he ready to operate in the Premier League? Well, I think he actually is, and I think I'm in a minority when I say that, but I do have a reason. The reason is, during his time with Sporting, when Amorim was in charge, Ugarte was used in a very simple, fairly basic, straightforward role. For example, in the first phase, he was not a player that would receive under pressure and look to turn away from the opposition and then drive forward. He wasn't someone who was regularly asked to showcase press resistance. He would do it on occasion, but particularly in the bigger occasions in the Champions League, this wasn't really a part of his game. Instead, his role, from a tactical point of view, was to play behind the opposition press. So let's say the goalkeeper's got the ball and the opposition are going to squeeze a little bit higher like this, going man for man, for example, with these defenders. Ugarte's role in this team wasn't to receive this first pass and look to turn. That simply wasn't his job. Instead, what he would do is stay a little bit higher. Eventually, the ball would be worked around the opposition's press, and then Ugarte would receive the ball. So rather than receiving immediately under pressure, he would actually receive with a little bit of time. Normally, what would happen next is the next line of pressure would then come from the opposition. But by this time, Ugarte is now facing play, rather than playing with his back to goal, and now he can carry the ball forward. And we can see an example of this against Arsenal in the Europa League. We can see him here, initially behind the opposition's press. He's not really an option for the ball in this situation, but he's going to make a short little movement just to his left hand side, and it opens up a little bit of space. Suddenly the pass can be played into him, in behind the opposition's high press. Ugarte has more time on the ball and therefore can take an aggressive first touch, looking to carry this ball into space to progress the ball forward for his team, and he does it really effectively to carry the ball forward. We've got something similar here, in a slightly easier game perhaps, but once again in the Europa League. Again, initially, he is not a passing option here. He can't receive the first ball because he is behind the opposition's high press. However, if you manipulate things well, you play this little reverse ball around the corner like so, Ugarte can now receive the ball, he has a little bit more time, and importantly, he is facing play. He's not receiving with his back to goal, everything is in front of him. And once again, he can take an aggressive first touch and move forward into the space. And I think that will suit him at Manchester United. As Sporting were then able to progress the ball forward, Ugarte would come more into the game and would play a more pivotal role as the heart, as the centrepiece of this Sporting Lisbon side. You can see it in a couple of his average positions from big games in the Europa League that season. You can see Ugarte is very much a holding midfielder, and the shape that his team are looking to take up is very often a 3-1 shape, and Ugarte, once again, is that singular pivot playing just in front of the defence. Now that may have been his tactical position, but what was actually his role? How did he look to play? Because suddenly I would say he got more of the ball, although he still wasn't truly a dictating midfielder, and actually once again, a lot of the time, his work would be done playing in behind the opposition, or certainly between different players. For example, he wasn't the midfielder to drop deep into the back four and fire passes through the lines. That wasn't really his job, and I wouldn't expect that to be his job at Manchester United. Instead, what I would expect him to do is once again occasionally play a little bit higher. Now what we are looking for is, rather than playing the first pass to Ugarte, we want to play the second pass to Ugarte, and that will involve a move which looks a little bit like this. For example, the wider centre back may have the ball, the inside forward can drop a little bit deeper, like so, the pass goes up initially, and then the ball goes backwards. Now that may sound very familiar, very similar to what Manchester United often done under Erik ten Hag. It's also very similar to how De Zerbi likes his team to build possession. Ugarte will be used in this manner. He won't receive the first pass through the middle like this, he will receive the second pass. And the benefit of this is as you play that first pass forward, the opposition collapse around the player on the ball, which means when Ugarte eventually gets the ball, he has much more time. And again, he's facing play. Now from here, he can be a bit more expansive. You know, he can fire long passes out to the wing back on the left-hand side or on the right-hand side. We saw a couple of really nice long balls at the weekend. But what I also like is just the fact that he's got time and it's a bit more settled to him. And I think that really suits his skill set. And that's why Amorim deserves credit, because he profiled Ugarte really well. Again, a couple of examples we are going to look at is Arsenal in the Europa League, and I chose this game simply because it's Premier League opposition, so it sort of makes sense. It's a better representation of his role at Sporting and how it could work with United. Again here, Ugarte can't receive the first pass. He's simply not an option. There's an Arsenal player in the way, you can't really get the ball to him. However, if you move the ball forward first and then move the ball backwards like that, Ugarte suddenly has more time on the ball. And we can see exactly that. The ball goes up, the ball goes backwards. Ugarte has all the time in the world. And again, the important thing is he is facing play. This is quite an easy job for him. He's not receiving on the half turn. He's not being overwhelmed by the intensity of a Premier League side. He's actually receiving the ball with quite a lot of time. He can face play. And generally speaking, his passing range is pretty good. We've got another example of it once again here, again in the Arsenal game. Can you get that ball to Ugarte? Probably not. Because of the Arsenal player here. You probably can't get that ball through there because of Gabriel Jesus. So instead what Sporting do is they move the ball forward initially, like so, and then they pass the ball backwards. And again, it allows you to get Ugarte on the ball with time. And in terms of once he's got time on the ball, Ugarte, in my opinion, is a really good retention passer. He's a very nice player at just keeping the ball for his team. He's not overly audacious, he's not a particularly expansive passer. He's not going to play through the lines, he's not going to create a lot of chances for our striker. He's not really that sort of player. But he will keep the ball well for us, and I think that's what Manchester United need in the middle of the park. If you imagine we are going to partner him with someone like Kobbie Mainoo will be given the license to be, expressing himself a bit more, playing with a bit more freedom, moving forward with the ball. Ugarte will be tasked with sitting there, holding things together, but playing actually fairly simple passes, which suits him perfectly. If we now flip things over and look at things from a more defensive point of view, out of possession, we will see a very different job for Ugarte. And I believe the reason for that is because Amorim believed in the defensive quality that Ugarte possessed, and therefore he gave him, at times, a relatively complex role. Starting off in the high press, we've spoken quite a lot about how Sporting did look to press high out of possession, but often one man down. So let's say the opposition are building with 5 players, Sporting would very often press with 4. And the reason for that was because Ugarte was used in this sort of hybrid role where he's essentially marking 2 players. So let's say the opposition build with a back 3, for example, like a lot of teams do. You might see the striker be aggressive on the centre back, and then the 2 inside forwards do something similar. You will then see a midfielder for the opposition dropping a little bit deeper to try and get on the ball. But that's not a problem, because our other midfielder, perhaps Kobbie Mainoo at Manchester United, or Gonçalves for Sporting, would follow this player in here. Ugarte, on the other hand, had a different role, because he was responsible, yes, for applying pressure here, but also helping out his centre-backs. So should the ball go long, up here for example, Ugarte was still responsible for being on this man. He essentially had 2 players. And the reason that Amorim gave him this role was because he believed Ugarte had the tenacity and the athleticism to jump over these small spaces. And that is what is important here. Because the backline for Sporting played quite high, the gaps for Ugarte to jump between were fairly small, and that really suits him. It allows him to be snappy kind of going into these challenges, and we can see exactly this again against Arsenal. You can see the higher Sporting players are man-to-man, 4v4 with the Arsenal defenders. If we look at Ugarte, however, he's actually got 2 players. He is helping his centre-backs with the deeper player, but he is also ready to go in midfield. And he times his movement well as the pass comes into midfield. That is Ugarte's cue to jump. He goes in with the tackle and he forces the opposition to play backwards. This next one is an even better example though. Again, Sporting, somewhat man-to-man. They are standing off a little bit, but you can see who their players are. When we look at Ugarte, it's not quite as clear because he's kind of between a few different players. What he is essentially waiting for is a loose pass into the midfield. That's going to make the decision for him. If he sees that loose pass, he is going to be aggressive, the centre-backs will be aggressive, and the whole team steps up to go man-to-man. And once again, Ugarte reads this really well. He sees this ball coming across the pitch, he snaps in, applies the pressure, and gets there to Zinchenko, turning over possession for his team. Again, it's actually really good work, and it's Amorim profiling him really well. As I have already said, the defensive role for Ugarte was not an easy one, and that continues into the mid-block as well. We saw in the high press he was often responsible for 1 or 2 players. In the mid-block he is more responsible for space, and it's more about being zonal, marking certain areas of the pitch, but that's really important to the way that Amorim sets up, and it's why I'm really confident he will go with Ugarte in his starting 11 for the first few weeks, for sure, to kind of get used to this new system, to help the team kind of settle into this new shape. Because Ugarte already knows the role, and again it is a fairly complex role, or certainly a physically taxing role, and that's because with this high 3 up here, the wing backs can sometimes be pinned a little bit deeper, And when that happens, we saw this against Manchester City in the Champions League last week. A different sporting side, of course, to the one that Ugarte played in, but a similar tactical problem. The ball could be moved out wide into these positions, and the central midfielders have a lot of work to do to kind of shuttle out into these wide areas. Fortunately, Ugarte is a very good player at doing this, particularly if he's got the right partner alongside him and also aggressive wider centre-backs. Ugarte is brilliant at doing this shuttling job across the pitch. And this is where, I said it when he first joined the club. He's not a holding midfielder, he's a ball-winning midfielder, and there is a big difference. A holding midfielder wants to sit in these positions here. A ball-winning midfielder wants to go about screening the play and trying to break up play. That is what Amorim will allow Ugarte to do. He will allow him to step away from the central position to engage in these wider areas, to try and snap into the tackle and win the ball back. And you guessed it, we've got examples from that game against Arsenal. Again, you can see it here pretty clearly from Sporting. You've got that front three, and then in the deeper midfield two, Ugarte and Gonçalves on this occasion. What happens? Arsenal move the ball a little bit wider, and you can see Ugarte is the one that is ready and required, really, to go into that space. He has to be willing to apply the pressure out wide. But again, he'd done this incredibly well during his time with Sporting Lisbon. He was phenomenal in these positions. Again, we can see it here in this sort of 2-3 shape. The ball goes a little bit wider. Who is the one responsible? It is Ugarte. Once again, ready to go into these positions. Now, was his tackling always perfect? Absolutely not. Let's be completely honest here. Ugarte is not the perfect tackler, but he does get through a lot of defensive work. Nothing showcases this better than his stats in his last season with Sporting Lisbon. His data MB report, the defensive work that he got through was ridiculous, but also actually his dueling percentage was pretty impressive as well. So can Amorim get all of that great work out of Ugarte at Manchester United? He done it with Sporting. He profiled him really well and got the best out of him. Can we expect something similar at United? Well, yes, I think we can, and the reason why I think we can is because if you go back and watch his performance against Leicester, it's actually incredibly similar to a lot of the things that we have just spoken about, particularly from a defensive point of view. If you partner him with someone who is willing to do defensive work, Ugarte can really shine, really blossom and do a lot of good work, being given the license to leave his position, to apply pressure, to play a hybrid pressing role between two players, and that will suit Kobbie Mainoo, allowing Mainoo to play a little bit higher. It's perfect for what Ugarte wants, and I think Amorim knows that, and I think it's why it will work quite well. In terms of on the ball, in possession, things will be difficult for Ugarte still, because the Premier League is tough, the intensity is really, really high, teams press really well, physically, Ugarte will struggle. However, we have seen already that Amorim knows how to apply certain methods, certain patterns, particularly that up and then backwards pass. That is how he will look to find Ugarte, with time on the ball. And Ugarte with time on the ball is a good player, is a good ball-playing midfielder. I don't care what anyone else says. With time, he is good on the ball. And I think Amorim will give him that environment tactically. And ultimately, that is the most important thing. Ugarte is going to get a manager that trusts him, believes in him, but also just simply knows how to get the best out of him because he's done it before. So I think Ugarte is going to go from strength to strength. Do I think he's perfect for Manchester United? No, but I do think he has the perfect manager. And that is very important if we want to get the best out of him. But those are, of course, just my opinions, my observations. I want to hear yours in the comments down below. Do you think Amorim will turn to Ugarte straight away? What areas of the game do you think he needs to improve? And what areas do you think he will excel straight away? Let me know what you think in the comments. But apart from that, we are finished for today. So thank you guys very much for watching. Hope you have enjoyed the video. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.